Hello, everyone, and welcome to Broward County Libraries Director's Interview featuring Patricia Engel. Today's program is part of the NEA Big Read 2023 program series. The NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. The Broward Public Library Foundation, the fiduciary agent of the grant funds, is a charitable organization incorporated in 1982 committed to enhancing the collections, programs, and services of the Broward County Library beyond the means of public funding. Broward Public Library Foundation is the proud agent of the NEA Big Read program, striving to achieve a state of excellence throughout the county's family of libraries. So we want to thank Broward Public Library Foundation and the NEA Big Read. We have a treat for you today. Broward County Library is hosting its NEA Big Read program today, featuring the award-winning author of Infinite Country, Patricia Engel. Allison Grubbs is the director of Broward County Library. She began serving Broward communities in 2019 when she was hired as Broward County Library's assistant director, and since then has provided steadfast leadership through several challenges for the staff and local residents and visitors, especially with the onslaught of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. Allison represents South Florida libraries in her work with the Florida Library Association, American Library Association, and the Urban Libraries Council. Previous to her roles in Broward, Allison worked in special and public libraries serving rural, suburban, and urban communities of all sizes throughout Washington and Georgia. She received her undergraduate degree in history at North Georgia College and State University, now University of North Georgia, and her Master of Library and Information Science at Valdosta State University. Allison's love language is caffeine. So at this moment, I will turn it over to Allison Grubbs. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. As noted, Patricia Engel is the author of Infinite Country, which was an instant New York Times bestseller, Washington Post Notable Book of the Year, Reese's Book Club pick, Esquire Book Club and Book of the Month pick, Indie Next pick, Amazon Best Book of the Year, and named a National Endowment for the Arts Big Read. Infinite Country is the winner of the New American Voices Award and was longlisted for the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. Patricia has been awarded fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Florida Division of Cultural Affairs, Breadloaf Writers Conference, Hedgebrook, and Key West Literary Seminar, among others, and is the recipient of an O. Henry Award. Born to Colombian parents, Patricia is a graduate of New York University and associate professor in the creative writing program at the University of Miami. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be with you today, here with you today, Allison.
Thank you so much. So I'm always been a big fan of works that are focused on brave young women. For example, I grew up reading Tamora Pierce, and I really felt that sensibility in this book, Infinite Country, about a brave young woman who crafted her own narrative, who didn't let life happen to her. It was more, she grabbed her life by the reins, and Talia really fits that bill when she is escaping from her prison for young girls so that she may reunite with her family. Do you see yourself or your family reflected in Talia or any of her family members?
Well, the short answer is that Talia is maybe somebody I would like to be like in some ways. She's very courageous and has a really strong sense of herself and and what she wants. But the character of Talia actually came from a news story that I came across, maybe something like 10 years ago. I came across a very small news story about a group of adolescent girls who had escaped from a reform school, a juvenile detention center in the mountains in Colombia, in a place called Santander. So there was no information about, what led up to it or what happened to those girls. But I thought, wow, those are some brave girls. And that was it. It just kind of stuck with me. I had this idea of really young girls. In the case of Talia, she's 15, who, take their freedom into their own hands and bust out against odds and with high risks. And there was just something about that appealed to me, probably because I wonder if I would have that kind of nerve. So I can't say that Talia comes from anywhere in me except that interest, that intrigue, and a little bit of envy, maybe wanting that kind of quality for myself. As for the story about her family, my family's own story is quite different. The only thing we really have in common is that my parents are also Colombians, and they're also people who immigrated to the United States at one point. And like Talia, I was born in the United States. But that's really it. My family story falls on other lines. However, the story of the family in Infinite Countries is a very common one. So there are, maybe sentimental similarities, that love and longing and closeness, and a sense of sacrifice that the parents make for their children, a sense of loyalty that the children feel for their parents, and wanting to protect one another. Those are things that I think cross over from the story of the family, certainly into mine and into many, many other families. And I sort of wrote outward from there.
I really like that you mentioned that love and longing and sacrifice. I for my book club picks, I often create the greatest sin, which is writing and annotating and scribbling and highlighting all through my books or my personal copies, not our library books. And I noted in one scene where Talia, her viewpoint is that her siblings have to speak slowly in English so that she can understand them. And I thought, and I actually wrote in the column, and unfortunately I left my by now battered copy at home today. But she's missing that connection, and she's longing to connect with her family, and that longing is so profound that she will not let anything stop her, not even the nuns at her reform school. And working in a library, working in the literary field, captivating first lines are often remembered throughout history, right? And so the line, "It was her idea to tie up the nun," really grabbed me right from the start. I'm sure you wrote so many different first lines for this, or maybe you didn't. Maybe it was a winner right from the start. How did you determine that to be the jumping off point for your novel?
Yeah, I actually didn't write any other first lines. That was the first one
Wow.
that I wrote, and that stayed the first line. That doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. And it's not to say that it just happens. It's really a part of the process. In my case, in my writing, I sit with a book for a very long time before I start writing it. Because in years past, I've had the experience of starting a book too soon, and then you kind of write yourself into a wall after 50 pages or so. So I really don't even sit and begin to write a story until I really feel like I have a handle on it in its entirety in my mind. So by the time I sat down to write that line, or the line just came out, I really had a sense of Talia's journey, her spirit, her spunk, how she fell into the group as kind of like a leader, an instigator, an initiator, and what sort of qualities she would bring to the situation. And it just, it just came to the surface, and I wrote it, and the scene comes out of that line. But yeah, that it was the first one that I wrote.
I appreciate that you mentioned spending time with your story and with your characters. I learned recently that, and it's going around online, and I did some research, and it is accurate that the author Hemingway would only stop writing for the day when he knew what was happening next. And I feel that you embody some of that wisdom of knowing your story before you continue it. You mentioned that this is very much a reflection of many Colombian families and their histories as they travel to seek life, either a better life or a different life, a life of adventure or a life of wealth, for whatever their motivations are behind leaving Colombia and embarking either individually in Talia's case or as a family unit, as seen with her parents. And this individual or community-wide diaspora is reflected often in scholarship. And here in South Florida, we spend a great deal of time focusing on the African diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, and in the popular imagination, we're only relatively recently starting to spend time examining and discussing Latin American diaspora as it relates to South Florida. What insight would you be able to provide, given your family, your community, their migrations? Because I've read some other interviews you've given in preparation for today, and you mentioned that you do have family still in Colombia.
Yeah, so the story of this family in Infinite Country is really not just one that is specific to Colombians. In fact, it's common to almost all people whose family history has migration somewhere in it, whether it's in the recent history or very far back. Certainly in a country like the United States, where the majority of the population came from elsewhere. So even people who don't recall it, whose family have been in this country for generations and generations, there was still that ancestor who created the rupture from the country of their origin to where they are now. So that exists within almost all of us. And that's something that I wanted to write into. In the case of the family in Infinite Country, they don't come to the United States with the intention of migrating. They come as tourists with tourist visas, which is a very common way that people, become immigrants, or, some people call it expatriates, right? Expats. They just stay. In the case of the family in Infinite Country, they come with the way a lot of people come to the United States, with a sense of adventure, to explore, to travel, always with the idea that they're going to go back home. Life starts to happen, life starts to change, as it does for many people. And they just stay a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And before you know it, years have passed, and life has changed to the point where you have more in this country than over there. And that happens all the time. So I really wanted to write into the nuance of that sort of experience of immigration. I grew up among immigrants and immigrant communities, and there's this really widespread mainstream idea that immigration is just like walking through a door, that everyone wants to get in, and once you're in, that's it. In fact, it's far more nuanced, far more complex. There's a lot of regret and pain and doubt and nostalgia and melancholy involved, and wondering if you made the right choice. Not everybody comes because they want to be here. A lot of people don't. A lot of people want nothing more than to go back to their homeland, because you can imagine the great pain of leaving, of the people who know you, the place you love and know well. And some people only make that choice when there is no better one, when they're at risk, or when the alternative is much, much worse. So I think that that's something that's prevalent across multiple diasporas. Diaspora is something that's not exclusive to any particular community. The Colombian diaspora is one of the largest in the world. There's more than 5 million Colombians living outside Colombia. So that's enough to make up a whole other country, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the reason why the United States has kind of this very skewed way of thinking about migration is because this is such an immense country that we take our own movement so for granted. The United States, you can fly from coast to coast, right? From the East Coast to the West Coast. a 6-hour flight or something like that. That's like flying from, you know, the top of South America to the bottom and crossing several countries. Here we just do that. We don't even think about it because no one's checking passports for anything like that. And there's a sense of entitlement to our ability to move, right? Yet when other people in other countries that are smaller, you know, so they're confined to smaller spaces, seek movement, which is a natural impulse. We question it. We wonder why. Why do they do this? You know, why would they do that? And it's really kind of absurd when you think about it.
Can we dig in a little deeper on this impulse to move and to migrate? I was really fascinated when I believe it was Morrow who noted that idly, I think prior to actually being married to Elena, that or before they left Colombia, that this impulse to move and to seek and to discover was bred into them from, I think he used the term, the infection of the colonizers who came to their shores so many generations ago. Do you feel that restlessness really is a true representation of movement?
Well, could be that. It could also be just like animals moved, seeking sources of water, seeking food for a change of climate, just for their own comfort, self-protection, to ensure their own survival. The human species does the same thing, right? But the human species, I think they say, is unique because we have self-awareness. We have, you know, existential quandaries. And this also motivates the need to move, to discover, to seek, you know, something beyond what we know. Where it comes from, we don't know. But I think that's also one of the mysteries of human existence, isn't it?
Right, absolutely. Especially, that instinct that's deep within us all, right? For myself personally, I have made 2 cross-country household moves. I started in Georgia. As you
Mhm.
noted, it is a 6-hour flight. You were spot on. It's exhausting. But it isn't formal, right? As it is to move from country to country, as it would be here. One of the interesting characters for me was Perla and her refusal to leave her laundry, to leave her business, that even though it was failing and they had to keep sinking money into it, she was not going to leave her built community, her home,
Mhm.
her business, her neighbors, her market. Those were never, and she made it clear from the start she was never leaving.
Mhm.
Um, and how do you reconcile that, leaving those family members behind, even if they're not happy where they are? She makes the keen observation that this may not be the country we want, but this is the country we deserve. And that I pondered that for days. I actually had to stop reading the book because it just was so profound. I had to just think about that for a while, which is another reason I love this novel so much. It just has these little gems hidden throughout this book that catch you unawares. But how as a family do you reconcile with that? Is it easier today with technology and connectedness digitally?
Well, certainly. Just to your last question, you know, just an example. When I was growing up, you know, phone calls and letters were the only way to communicate with South America. So my mother, you know, would be on the phone. It was very expensive, so it didn't happen often. Letters may or may not arrive. And you think about how things are now because of WhatsApp and email and texting and Wi-Fi and the whole thing, and FaceTime and the internet. People can be connected all day long, right? And there's really a sense of continuity that did not exist before, when people had to leave, you know, and you had a great sense of time passing and the gaps growing larger and larger, and the unknowing and growing apart. So I think there's something really beautiful about what technology can afford in terms of the preservation of relationships. Um, certainly we've all learned that much better. Even now, you and I are talking over the internet, and we all became masters of this with the pandemic when we were forced to remain apart. That is something that immigrant families separated by distance have known for a long time how to do and how to manage. But what you brought up earlier about the desire to not leave, even if your life is imperfect or flawed, wherever it is. You think about it, who would want to? Who wants to leave what they love? You mentioned that you've moved yourself, but I'm sure that you know a great many people where you started out who never left, right? There are always those who leave. There are those who stay. It's no different anywhere, whether you're talking about leaving a small town and going to the next town over, or you're talking about going cross country or from one country to another. There are some who feel compelled to do it. There are others who don't. And I think that's also part of the story that is often omitted.
That's wonderful. I am traditionally a historian before I was a librarian. And so reading the indigenous Colombian creation stories that you just wove throughout the story, it was very seamless. You would just drop a little nugget about the jaguar, and how it came, the stories came into being, and how people even today still so closely align themselves with those beliefs, and how they see that in their everyday life. What really inspired you to include these tales in Infinite Country?
Well, I think one of the things I wanted to explore was the larger story of a family separated by migration, by deportation, by time, distance, space, and how they remain a family well apart is beyond the paperwork of visas and expiration dates and all those things. What part does the land that made us play in our story, and what happens when we leave that? And I think, some of us are so used to being displaced by where our peoples, originated, that we don't even have a connection of that anymore. But when your family has been on the same land, quite literally, for centuries, the connections might be different. So that's something that I wanted to explore. It happens at the region of Bogotá. Cundinamarca is my mother's hometown. My mother's hometown was Bogotá. So some of the stories of that region I grew up with because she shared them with me. And then over the years, as I spent more time in Colombia and traveling around, there are different stories that are particular to different regions. It's a very vast and diverse landscape across the country. So I wanted to incorporate those because they are stories that are ancestral. It's ancestral knowledge that is important, that are important to the people and certainly to the characters of the book, in the same way any inherited history is. And ultimately, when a family leaves wherever it is they started out and goes elsewhere, really the only thing that you take with you are your stories. Objects get lost. You can't take your house with you. And through time and the passing of generations, that's the only thing that remains is what gets told, what gets shared, what gets passed on. We all know one of the first things to go is language, right? Culture, customs, traditions, those things evaporate very, very quickly, And one way to hold on to them, or try to, is through storytelling. It's a way to make meaning. It's a way to remember who we are, who we were. And they become even more important the further away you get from those stories.
And a true act of love, truly, to
Mhm.
share those stories. So I have a slightly more personal question for you, which is, what inspired you to become an author, and why did you choose a fictional format to share Talia's story?
Well, I don't think I chose it. It's kind of it all
Oh,
chose me. I was kind of writing before I even knew how to write. I would just imagine stories until I learned how to write. And the minute I knew how to put words together to make sentences, I started drawing sentences to go along with my pictures, writing sentences to accompany my drawings, and telling stories. So it's something that came very early. I don't know from where. And fiction is my preferred form. I've always been like a journal keeper for most of my life. So, that's just for me. I love the invention, the creation in fiction. I love the freedom of it. So it's just where I feel most at home.
I love that. A born storyteller.
Mhm.
And for those born storytellers in our community, do you have 2 or 3 suggestions that you could share for authors who might be looking to take their work to the next level?
Yeah, there are no secrets. There are no shortcuts. The best education is reading. Read everything you can, and try to read things that no one is telling you to read. Read outside your comfort bounds. Seek out different types of literature, books in translation, other voices, and just keep writing. It's a practice. It's a discipline. It's an art form. And you'll only get better the more you do it. Fortunately, it's not like sports. You don't peak when you're young. You just get better with age. So the more you stick with it, the better you will get. And ultimately, our greatest treasure, our most valuable possession, is our time. Be careful what you give your time to. A lot of us give a lot of time away to social media and all kinds of things that don't give you much back. And so be careful with what you do with your time, because you could be nurturing your writing in other ways.
That's lovely. Thank you. Finally, Patricia, what other things, if anything, would you like people to know about you and your work?
Oh, well, I guess the big and exciting news is I have a new book coming out on January 24th. It's called The Faraway World. It's a short story collection. So it's my follow-up to Infinite Country. So yeah, that's something I'm happy to share with readers.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I've often heard that's often the hardest part, is the what's next piece of it, and how do you choose when your brain is just stuffed full of stories to push forward. So I can't wait to get my hands on
Thanks.
that. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you, Patricia, so much for joining us today to talk a little bit more about your work, Infinite Country. And we are going to be sharing this video online, and I am having a few additional Directors Book Club discussions with community members to hear their thoughts and to really do more deep diving into this fantastic, fantastic story that you have gifted us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful questions, and for reading and sharing the book. I appreciate it so much.
Yes, thank you. Oh, and I love that we have an image of your upcoming book.
Mhm.
And is this the final cover for it?
It is. It
I
is.
love that. Okay, I know Infinite Country has gone through
Mhm.
3 different covers,
No,
and they're
it's just the hardcover and the paperback. So
oh,
this,
hardcover and
yeah.
paperback. Okay, they're so different, and I love them
Mhm.
both equally, but they are very different, striking in their own ways. So thank you again so much, and we're going to close this out. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thanks. Bye
Bye bye.
bye.